Welcome back to Lost Touch channel. My name is Anton Vieltsin. I'm an attorney in the Southern District of California here in San Diego. If you've subscribed to my YouTube channel, you've recently noticed a short video discussing 3 general categories of citizen police encounters. Now, the first category is called consensual encounter, and the Fourth Amendment that protects you against unreasonable searches and seizures is not triggered, and so you don't get any protection. The second type of category is a brief detention. Some people call this a Terry stop because of the Supreme Court case Terry versus Ohio. Now, in order to detain an individual, police officers need to have reasonable suspicion that that person committed a crime. Now, you'll know you're in detention because a reasonable person in your position would not feel free to leave and end the encounter with the police. And then, of course, a detention can become a de facto arrest. And in order to arrest an individual, police officers need to have probable cause that that person committed a crime. Now, in that short video, I told you not to argue with the police on the street whether you're being detained or arrested. Simply ask the officers, are you free to leave? And if you're free to leave, then go on your way. If the officer tells you that you're not, well, then you're being detained or maybe even arrested. It is going to be up to your lawyer later to argue that you've been arrested without probable cause or detained without reasonable suspicion. And if that happens, your case can get dismissed and maybe some of the evidence can get suppressed. Because after all, officers need to have probable cause to arrest and reasonable suspicion in order to detain. Today, we're going to look at a case where a person gets stopped. It's a 16-year-old kid by the police. He's held, put in the back of the car. His lawyer later argues that the brief detention actually was an arrest, even though he was not in handcuffs. And before we go on, I want to thank you for watching this video on YouTube, hitting that subscribe button. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star review rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to loststash.com and check out some of the merch, including these Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching.
Quick message from Lost Stash. Are you charged with a crime? Or do you want to know your rights if stopped by police? Watch California attorney Anton Vieltsin discuss legal cases from the Supreme Court, Ninth Circuit, and California state courts on the Lost Stash YouTube page. Anton has handled hundreds of federal and state criminal cases, has an in-depth knowledge of the law, and has the best mustache ever. Subscribe to the Lost Stash YouTube page. That's LAWSTACHE.
Today we'll be discussing a Ninth Circuit case, United States versus Ricardo D. Now, the first thing you notice is that we're using the defendant's first name alone. That is because Ricardo was a minor at the time of the offense. He was 16 years old. But first, let me give you some factual background. Border Patrol officers were observing the border in a nearby ranch. In recent days, they saw some footprints and suspected there was some drug activity related to the ranch. They saw about 5 or 6 men cross from Mexico and quickly run into the ranch. About 10 minutes later, they saw a van leave the ranch. The officers pursued. They made a stop. This was around 9:30 p.m. During the stop, one of the people in the van fled. The officers made the decision not to pursue that man and instead focus on the van, arresting the driver, and inside they found bundles of drugs and the whole van smelled like marijuana. A few hours later, around 11:15 p.m., a dispatch received a call about a suspicious person at a nearby store. Officers responded there, but once they got to the scene, they found that the individual that was there was actually a person that they knew in the community. The person had nothing to do with the encounter with the van. But while they were there, a truck driver drove up and said that he recently picked up a young Mexican kid. He drove him about 1.5 miles to a payphone near a restaurant. So the officers then drove to that location, and as Officer Bork drove up, he saw a young man, Ricardo D., crouched behind a tree approximately 20 feet from a payphone and adjacent to the restaurant. Ricardo made no attempts to flee or leave the area as the patrol car approached. Deputy Bork faced his car, illuminating Ricardo. He walked up to him, patted him down, and directed him over to the patrol car. As they were walking to the car, Bork told Ricardo that I don't want you to be running anymore. He was also holding Ricardo by the arm. Ricardo replied that he would not run. Bork then asked Ricardo to sit in the back of the patrol car with the door left open, and then he proceeded to question him. He asked Ricardo what he was doing in the area. Ricardo replied that he was dropping off a friend. He then told the officers about the fact that he was going to a school nearby and that the school was not in session right now. He also then recanted and said that he was actually not going to that particular school, so the story made no sense. Officer Bork told Ricardo that if he kept lying, Bork could arrest him for providing false information. Now, a few minutes later, more officers arrived. One of the officers asked Ricardo again what he was doing in the area. Ricardo replied that he had gotten lost in the field near the restaurant. He also said that he had stopped at a nearby house and had asked the man for a ride. Now, of course, again, the agents did not believe Ricardo. And at some point, another agent, Agent Emery, asked Ricardo if he knew about the van that was stopped on the flyway. Ricardo first denied any knowledge of the van, but then, when asked again, he admitted that he was the person that fled from the scene. So if you've noticed, he's being questioned here without Miranda. Well, Miranda comes later. The agents then gave Ricardo his Miranda rights. They take him to the substation. There, they again give him Miranda rights. And at the station, he once again admits to being the person in the van who fled. He goes to trial, a bench trial, and he's found guilty of being a juvenile delinquency based on possession with intent to distribute marijuana. Now, here's what the arguments are. In this case, we once again have to determine whether a detention became a de facto arrest. Ricardo's attorneys argue that even the initial encounter with the police, when he's in the back of the patrol car initially, that has been an arrest already. And because he was arrested without probable cause, the arrest becomes illegal, and all the statements that follow have to be suppressed. The Supreme Court itself recognized that distinguishing between a detention and a de facto arrest can be a difficult task. The court also reminded us that Terry stops are an exception to the Fourth Amendment requirements. And we have to be careful that the Terry stops don't swallow the general rule that seizures under the Fourth Amendment must be supported by probable cause. Now here, under the totality of circumstances, the court concludes that the detention of Ricardo during the field questioning by the officers amounted to a de facto arrest. With the high beams of the police car shining in his face, 16-year-old Ricardo was patted down, gripped by the arm, told not to run, and directed to the back of the patrol car. Now, the court said that holding the individual and isolating him, who's unarmed, compliant juvenile in the back of the police car was unnecessarily coercive, and thus transformed the investigatory stop into an arrest. And then we can also talk about the fact that he's in the back of the patrol car. Court has said in quotes that being in the patrol car is not an ideal location for the purposes of an investigatory detention. Of course, other circuits and other courts have recognized that there could be some exceptions why a police officer could put an individual in the back of a patrol car, and that would not be an arrest. But here those exceptions don't apply. Officers did not have a reason to fear for their own safety or the safety of others. This was also not a traffic stop, so they didn't need to remove Ricardo from a vehicle away from his belongings and be put into the vehicle that's owned by the government. There was no need to isolate him from the general public. Thus, all the circumstances, including the facts that the suspect was 16, taken by the arm, told not to run and placed in the back of the police car indicate a degree of coercion unacceptable as part of a Terry stop and unsupportable on anything less than probable cause. Having determined that Ricardo was in fact arrested during the field questioning means that the government must now meet a higher threshold of probable cause in order for those statements to stay in. But the government apparently concedes probable cause to arrest Ricardo did not exist prior to Ricardo's initial admission to Agent Amory that Ricardo was the one who fled from the van. At the time of Ricardo's arrest, the only knowledge possessed by the officers was that a young, thin man, not too tall, had run from the van containing marijuana, and that the truck driver had picked up a young Mexican male approximately 1/2 mile from where the van has been stopped, and having given him a ride to the payphone in Nicholasville, in a location only 30 miles north of the Mexican border. It is hardly be said that the presence of a young Mexican male is highly unusual. Furthermore, although Officer Bork found Ricardo crouching behind a tree, Ricardo made no attempt to flee when approached by the officer. In sum, while there may have been reasonable suspicion to justify a Terry stop, there was insufficient information to lead a reasonable person to believe that Ricardo had committed a crime offense. Ricardo's arrest was thus illegal. Here's the takeaway from this case. Because of unnecessarily coercive nature of the stop, a detention can in fact become a de facto arrest. And if the person is deemed arrested, well then the government must prove that they had probable cause to make that arrest. And here, the government conceded and couldn't prove that they had probable cause. They didn't have enough information to say that Ricardo committed a crime. They did not have probable cause. And because of that, all the statements that followed must be suppressed and cannot be used against Ricardo in trial. So this case will go back to the lower court and most likely get dismissed. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. If you're listening to the podcast version of this recording on Audible or Spotify, please give my podcast a 5-star rating. And finally, if you want to support this channel, consider going to loststash.com and check out some of the merch, including these Do Not Arrest This Person t-shirts. Thanks for watching.